From Whingers to winners for Norwich City, a dramatic 2-1 win at Bristol City on Sunday, 3 wins from 4. We're going to be asking questions about whether this is just, as maybe some supporters are suggesting, papering over some very large cracks, or whether this could be a corner turned for Norwich City and for David Wagner. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. Full quota on these lovely blue sofas that we've got. Still looking for some yellow and green ones, so if anyone out there has some, please do get in touch. I'm Connor Southwell.
Not if it means just lifting it up 2 flights of stairs, Connor.
No, yeah, we'll add. Well, we've got a lift, so I'll help you to a lift, and then we can do it that way. But that's fine. I'm from Southwell. Sam Seaman to my right, Paddy Davitt and Adam Harvey to my left to reflect on what's been a busy old week for Norwich City, culminating in yesterday's win at Ashton Gate, which I'm not sure even some of the players would have seen coming as the clock ticked over 90 minutes. It was a dramatic late winner from Adam Idah. We had David Wagner on the pitch. We had Bedlam in the away end. Paddy, to start with you. I mean, after everything that's happened this week, the defeat at Watford, which was bad, the AGM as well, the comments that surfaced from that, felt like a result, a moment that everybody needed connected to Norwich City.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summation. I mean, obviously, we'll treat it in isolation, what we saw on Sunday, because, in the broader picture, I'm not sure it resolves any of the bigger picture issues, certainly the manner of that performance again, but it doesn't feel really the moment in the manner that they've won that game that we should be dissecting it quite so brutally for me. Let's just, as you say, because it's been unyielding misery, it feels, for quite a considerable amount of time, and then culminating with that annual meeting and comments about Whingers and what have you, and play up Pompey, that let's just pause and try and I've seen it on social media since the final whistle Sunday. Yeah, nobody's saying this is now a corner turned or, Wagner is the man mid to longer term, but in the here and now, given the backdrop of what's led us to this point, you've got to take as most joy out of it as you can, and to win a game in that manner. But nobody should be kidded by, the underlying elements of that performance that, it was probably in spite of rather than because of. But no, fair play. 3 wins in 4, remarkably, and 2 home games to come, and 4-point gap as it stands to the playoffs. So things do turn remarkably quickly in the Championship, and they needed to, because as we all know, it's been quite an uncomfortable period for David Wagner principally, and that's why it was on a human level, because I think he still retains quite a lot of goodwill from a lot of Norwich fans, even if they don't necessarily feel that he is the man to lead them forward in the mid to longer term. But as an individual, as a representative of your football club, the passion and the enthusiasm and the willingness to turn this around, you can't deny him that, and you can't deny him that celebration moment with Adam Idah and the players. So, yeah, respite, but only time will tell now if this is something, resembling a watershed moment for him and Norwich this season.
Indeed, and we'll get into maybe this kind of results performance debate, which it feels like we've had quite a lot this season with Norwich City. But Sam, it felt like, particularly in the second half, Norwich were after their equaliser, which obviously came from an own goal from George Tanner, after a lovely, as Norwich City goals tend to, a lovely pass from Gabriel Sara to Dimi Yanulis. It felt like Norwich were pretty set, pretty content for a point. It kind of felt like that was the way the game was going. Bristol City saw a lot of the ball, but maybe similarly to QPR, failed to maybe convert that possession and control into real clear-cut opportunities. There were a couple of real saves that Angus Gunn had to make before half-time, but less so in the second half. And then that moment occurs, and for Adam Idah in particular, I mean, David Wagner has christened him the most dangerous substitute in the Championship. I mean, it's brilliant for him as well, and he's someone who's had to endure a lot of frustration and a lot of patience at Norwich City, and there's still questions to answer about him as well and his kind of long-term future and whether he can convert what he's doing as a substitute at the moment into a starter. But it felt really positive for him as well.
Yeah, I'm delighted for him. I think you sort of highlighted the strange situation that he's in now there, because all he's doing really at the moment is reinforcing that idea that I think Wagner has started to suggest that he's sort of a super sub. Obviously, he's never going to say that prevents him from being able to start, because he probably wants to keep the motivation high for Idah. But yeah, he does seem to be proving that. You look at Watford, obviously, on Tuesday when he started, and didn't really have an especially good game. To be honest, I thought struggled to really make an impact on it, and that's the pattern that we've seen throughout the season. Then he goes to Bristol, doesn't start, and scores in the 95th minute, obviously, and it's hard to really argue with what Wagner's saying. I'm not really sure what it is that takes him to that level. Wagner seemed to suggest it's sort of a readiness when he comes onto the pitch that maybe other substitutes don't have, that he doesn't need any time to sort of hit the ground running. But I actually thought, aside from the goal, which was incredibly well taken, to be fair, I think there was a touch across the defender that was just really intelligent to stop the defender getting in there. But before that, his touch was really off. He didn't really have much of an impact, and maybe rather than just feeling like he's a super sub, I feel like he's just a penalty box striker who isn't maybe as technically capable maybe as some of the other strikers Norwich have had in recent years. But when the ball drops in the box and it's, Adam Idah's in and around it, you do feel pretty much like he's going to be able to finish it. You look at the goals that he scored this season. I think there was that one, obviously, Hull, where it's just dropped sort of 3 yards out and he's the first one to react. Cardiff, again, he knew where to stand when the ball's bounced off the keeper to him. And then this one, again, in the box, close range finish. Even going back to last season, I think one of his rare goals was getting a point at QPR literally from 1 yard out. So as much as that feels like a fairly simple thing to do, you have to know where to be and you have to anticipate pretty well. You look at strikers who have made a career of that, like Jordan Rhodes is probably a prime example of that. So I think to me it suggests more that he is capable in those scenarios where teams are trying to get something from the game or maybe counter-attacking and the ball's just going to drop somewhere, and he seems to have that knack for knowing where it's going to land. So that's where I'd probably draw that distinction. I think in general, slower possession-based play, he probably struggles to really make an impact because I'm not really sure his touch is really up to that sort of style of play in those sorts of situations. But we made the comparison yesterday on the way back to Lukaku, and I do sort of see that. I think he comes alive in certain situations, but at times you do look at it and you wonder maybe how he's got to the level that he has with the touch, because it does bounce off him a little bit too regularly, and that might be what stops him from going on and having a real top level career. But I think you can be sure out of everyone in the Norwich squad at the moment, if you wanted a chance to fall to anybody in the 18-yard box or you just wanted the ball to drop loose, you'd expect Adam Idah to be on the end of that and to dispatch it, and hopefully that's the reputation that he can go and stake for himself rather than one as a super sub, because to be honest, as much as he won't like it, he is doing a pretty good job of casting himself in that role this season.
Yeah, and it's a mission for everybody, mission for him, I guess, for David Wagner, for Norwich City, structures and all of that kind of thing, I guess, to try and find a way of incorporating that pace and power, which is so effective off the bench, into something that they can really harness from the start. And you used the Lukaku example. I was going to say literally the same thing, because technically there isn't that kind of... I don't want to say it, maybe if you compare him to Hwang, who I think is a little bit more technical, able to link, but maybe doesn't possess the same pace and power. He's quite a blunt force, Adam Idah, and yesterday's a good example. He's in a foot race, and maybe that aggression is what I've been wanting to see from him. That ability to just shrug off a defender and take the finish really well was superb. Adam, let's come to you, because as we said right from the top, it's been a difficult week for those Norwich fans. 1,100 travelled to Ashton Gate. I'd imagine for a lot of the afternoon they maybe would have spent their time wondering why they committed to early coaches and the money that they had spent. By the end of it, the feeling had completely changed. And again, we're going to get into the performance, but I just want to talk about that feeling, because there hasn't been much of that in the Norwich City world as of late.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally you go to football to see your team win and get 3 points on a Saturday or Sunday, as it was in this scenario. Of course, the comments during the week, are not helpful. It's kind of, I suppose, made fans feel like their kind of voices are maybe not being heard by those that are in power at the football club at the moment, and ultimately the fans are the ones that will be here from the minute they start supporting the club till the day they die. And I suppose those that in the ownership, I mean, Norwich of course is a little bit different in that Delia and Michael are fans of the football club, but typically football owners won't be here in the long term. They are just sort of short-term custodians of a team. Not that that's the case for Norwich, but I think for those that would have made that journey and spent hard-earned money, that moment at the end will live long in their memory for the upcoming weeks and games. Of course, lots of big games coming up for Norwich, and they need to up the performances, because the performance, for any fan that was there, it's not a pretty watch. It's not what Ben Napper wants. It's probably not what the Norwich fan base want in terms of a style of football that kind of you can associate with the team and Norwich as a club. But moving forwards, I mean, that moment will hopefully breed a bit of confidence into some of the players that have been lacking it so desperately. And I think the fact they're now starting to get a lot of these kind of starters back as well that have been injured for quite a while, hopefully that will help David Wagner in what was at the start of the season working quite well in terms of his system and his sort of style of play. So we'll see what we get. But I think, from a fan's perspective, if you're in that away end, that moment will be that will be sort of a mood booster for them for the whole week, really, that they can live off that, and making that long poke home from Bristol, they at least had something to kind of cling on to, because if you want to sort of break down the 90 minutes performance, which we're going to come on to, it wasn't pretty particularly.
It wasn't, and it's so often in football it can be about moments, and that feels like it could be a moment, and ultimately we won't know until maybe we see what happens against Preston and Sheffield Wednesday in the next two home games. But if there feels like an opportunity there, at least to try and unify a bit. I'm not sure it will fully be unified unless Norwich can go and win maybe even their next three, given the third of those is an East Anglian derby. But certainly in this moment of everything that happened this week, a moment like that was, I'm sure everyone, certainly internally at Norwich City, was breathing a massive sigh of relief. But Paddy, let's kind of break down the game. I described it in my verdict really as a game of four quarters. Norwich started well. I thought they started the better, actually. They had two really good opportunities from Ashley Barnes. Onel Hernandez then hit the post. They didn't have a shot then after that. Onel Hernandez won in minute 24 through to half-time. Jason Knight scores a goal on the 34th minute. There's sustained Bristol City pressure. There's a Tommy Conway chance after he gets slotted through from Andy Vyman that Angus Gunn makes an excellent save. There was a header as well, which I thought it was Rob Dickey in real time, but what I'm looking at suggests it was Jason Knight with a header, and that was a great save from Angus Gunn that he tipped over. Norwich were able to get into at half time. They came out and again with a better side of that second half. Got obviously the goal, but before that had a flurry. Well, not really a flurry, but Ashley Barnes had a header. There was a couple of shots from Gabriel Sara, a couple from Marcelino Nunez. Then the goal comes, and again similarly to the first half, they didn't have a single shot until Adam Idah put the ball in the back of the net in the 95th minute. It was all Bristol City who had 6 opportunities prior to that Adam Idah strike. So really weird game in terms of how it transpired, and that's probably led to Liam Manning after the game feeling probably pretty hard done by, because he felt his side did have control. What did you make of the performance? Because a lot of it now will shift. We've spoken about 3 wins in 4. I saw someone, and apologies, I don't know who posted it, but I saw someone post on social media last night. Even though it is 3 wins out of 4, it kind of hasn't felt that way in a sense. And certainly the performances, they've done it. I was looking just as Sam was speaking. Their possession in the last 3 games against QPR, it was 38%. Watford, all right, they lost that game, but that was 34%. Bristol City was only 40%. They've not achieved an XG of 1 in their last 3 games, so that maybe hints at the performance levels. I guess that the conversation will be whether, as I said right at the start, whether this is a run that is maybe papering over some of the cracks that Norwich City have at the moment, or whether it can actually be the foundation for dragging those performance levels up and matching them with results. We've spoken before about David Wagner teams being quite streaky. What do you make of the performance levels at the moment? Are they doing enough to convince you that it can be a period, I guess, where maybe they can have a bit more success in terms of aligning those performances and results together?
Well, what I would say is, I was going to quote those possession stats in the last 3 games, but they've effectively played 3 teams in the mid to lower levels of the table. Until we see, dare I say, Ipswich in 3 games' time. Returns against Southampton, I think that's over the festive period at Carrow Road. Leeds is January as well, and of course they'll have to go to Leicester. If this template was effective in terms of results against that bracket of team, then yes, I think there is a sustainable argument you can make. But like a lot of this at the minute, the jury remains out, because Michael Wynne-Jones, going back to that annual meeting in terms of results rather than performances or how they were playing, said it was about consistency or an inconsistency, and that's the root cause, that they're not consistent enough, both in results or performances. And you just think that template, how they're trying to go about it in the last 2 or 3 games, that's not a recipe for me for a consistency over a half a season, longer, ideally. Because really you broke it down there. That game could have been the way you broke that down in terms of chances and when they came in the game. That was Watford as well. I think you put the stat out, there was this huge swathe of time at Vicarage Road in that second half where Norwich didn't create anything, and that isn't sustainable game after game after game. What it does show is they have a finisher in Adam Idah. They have, despite, maybe to the contrary, on this downward spiral, there is character, there is a togetherness, there is a willingness to fight for each other. They are all admirable qualities, but you do need to, it's like you're going to the well every game to try and dredge something rather than a far more economical style of play, a strategy in and out of possession that is going to be residually effective to pick up results. And again, I keep cross-referencing, you look at Southampton, what a Russell Martin team's all about week in, week out. They're playing in a style that is proving robust enough to get results in the Championship week in, week out. Ipswich, dare I say, Leeds have picked up under Farker. Leicester have been there all the way through. These teams have a clear identity for me, a clear style of play of what they're trying to do. The players that they have fit the system, which again cuts to maybe the recruitment debate of this in terms of Norwich. So no, at the minute, I wouldn't be overly confident that the manner that they're mining results in this 3 or 4 game spell is going to be over the entirety of what remains of the season enough to get the job done. If the job done is to be in and around that top 6 conversation, it just feels, if you're reliant on a 95th minute winner, if you were QPR, they were, even I wasn't at the game, but they were very fortunate that day. If QPR had a clinical edge, I don't think they win that game. So, as David himself said yesterday, a lot of Championship games are fine margins, and too often in this run up to now, they fell the wrong side of it. And of course, they'd start to throw in the mitigation of injuries. I think that masks too many deficiencies in terms of the coaching and what those players who are available are being asked to do in and out of possession. But to go back to what I said at the start, maybe we part that for the here and now and just reflect on 3 wins in 4. How they've achieved them, you can debate, but they have achieved them. And if they follow up now with 2 home wins, ideally, or certainly 4 points from 6 against Preston and Sheffield Wednesday, then that is starting to get into the realms of maybe this is sustainable. Maybe they have found something. And what I'm kind of clinging to a little bit on this run is I don't think they're playing well, but they're getting results. So with results and ideally better defensive performances breeds confidence. With confidence, maybe they start to feel they can express themselves a bit more on the pitch. So it's almost line in the sand, pick up some results. Through that, maybe that'll breed a little bit of confidence, and then we'll start to see a bit more of what we want to see in terms of on the ball. And through that, maybe it can trigger something moving into the second half of the season with, of course, the likes of Gunny now back, massive player for them. Grant Hanley not that far away, unless he has hopefully he doesn't have another setback, and crucially, I think, Josh Sargent, hopefully, before Christmas. And then all the elements are there for them to try and get back to what they were doing in that first 8 or 9 game block.
Yeah, and as we see, Adam, I mean, these things tend to go either one or 2 ways. When we talk about maybe a difference between performance and results, you either have the performances catching up with the results or the results catching up with the performances. So it's up to Norwich, I guess, to kind of lift those levels of performance up. And Paddy mentioned it there. They've got a really good opportunity now. 2 home games. Preston, who are majorly out of form, recording some of the worst numbers in the division at the moment. And then obviously Sheffield Wednesday, who are rooted to the bottom of the Championship, although have picked up a little bit. They've got a real opportunity now in front of their home fans, where it's been quite miserable being a Norwich City fan this season. A real opportunity to inject some optimism through their performances and hopefully to show a bit more control of matches, which, as we've said there and maybe was documented again yesterday, just feels like they're lacking a little bit. And if they can wrestle some of that back, combined with obviously the attacking edge that they do have and have had, and even though they're seemingly outperforming their numbers a little bit at the moment, it feels like this is a real opportunity for them to change their narrative a bit, obviously with that East Anglian derby on the horizon as well.
Yeah, I think as well, given like 3 of the last three of the last 4 games, the 2 wins at Cardiff and Bristol City, 90% of Carrow Road weren't at those games. I mean, that win against QPR was pretty drab. Obviously, again, I wasn't at the game, but they weren't there to see that Adam Idah moment. They weren't there at Cardiff to see the kind of rapid turnaround they had in that sort of 3 or 4 minute spell. So it feels quite a while since kind of the home fans have actually seen a good performance and a sort of a good result matched in that. So I think this is an opportunity, 4 points outside the playoffs as well. I mean, if they can get, back-to-back wins or even 4 points from the next 2 home games, it then breeds a little bit of confidence going into that big East Anglian derby as well, and sort of the big Christmas period that's coming up for them. And the other side of the East Anglian derby is Huddersfield at home as well, which are another side that are sort of down there in the table. So it feels like these 3 home games particularly are a great opportunity to really maximise the points. And then if you then get Sargent back, I think the whole mood and the sort of, I suppose, the feeling around the football club could completely change, because, you say they are then sort of just only a point or 2 points outside the playoffs ahead of that sort of Boxing Day clash at West Brom, then everyone's going to be back on side a little bit again. I'm not saying for the long term. I think there's still going to be question marks around David Wagner and sort of Ben Napper's sort of vision for the football club moving forwards. And I don't think David Wagner's the long term option for this team, but at least it then gives a little bit of optimism and something for fans to go back to Carrow Road excited to go and watch their team again, because it feels like it's been such a lifetime since fans have really sort of enjoyed going to Carrow Road. They had that small spell, I suppose, at the start of this season where they were getting wins, but there's an opportunity. The injuries, as you say, will be a huge boost in terms of getting Sargent back, because I think the system that David Wagner wanted to try and play at the start of the season, you could see that it was starting to reap some rewards, and how crucial he was with Barnes in terms of the way he's trying to play. So the next 2 games for me could be big. If they get a couple of wins or even 4 points, then it just provides that springboard to then go into the Ipswich game with probably a little bit more optimism than the fan base is feeling at the moment. And I think we spoke about it. I mean, Paddy on the way back, and I think the Ipswich players are already sort of focused on that Norwich game, and kind of they're really hyping it up. And sometimes that can almost work in Norwich's favour, that a team are so, I suppose, built up in terms of adrenaline that Norwich could go there and almost play what they're doing at the moment and just try and nick a result. I'm not saying that will be the case, but we can live and hope. And I think the next 2 games are a good opportunity to try and go into that Ipswich game with a little bit of confidence.
Here's one for you then, and I'll ask you all this, because you kind of documented the run of games there. Preston, Sheffield Wednesday, Ipswich away, then Huddersfield. Would you take 3 wins from those home games if it meant a defeat at Portman Road? If I could say now, that would mean Norwich City would head into that Boxing Day clash, and obviously into Christmas as well, sitting inside the top 6. Sam, would you take that?
No. Since I started watching Norwich, they've never lost to Ipswich, and I've never been to a derby in person either. So if I go in the first one I'm at, they lose, I'll be absolutely heartbroken, to be honest with you. And I'll feel like I'm the curse, as much as I'll try and be as impartial as possible. I feel like when it comes to a derby, and also, right, like, I suppose this might be looking at things glass half empty, but I don't personally feel Norwich have any real likelihood of being promoted or relegated this season. So, not to say none of it matters, but 3 wins or not. I think if they can stay unbeaten against Ipswich this season, which is admittedly a very slim possibility, it might be actually more of a long-term achievement than anything they managed to do this season. Because for me, 3 wins might be the difference between 11th and 15th at the end of the season. But I'm sure Norwich fans aren't going to be especially bothered by that, to be honest. I suppose I could look at it in a more glass half full way, and if I actually genuinely felt there was a chance of them reaching the playoffs, I'd say take the 3 wins all day. But for me, maybe that's quite a negative viewer of the way that things are going on the pitch at the moment. I'd probably say take the draw or win against Ipswich, as long as they don't lose.
I think I'd take the 3 wins, Paddy.
All day long. But then I'm not a Norwich fan, so, but in the bigger picture, then, because 9 points from 12 off the back of 9 from the previous 12. Taking Sam's point, whether they are playoff material or not, you'd have to say not, but at least they would be in that conversation moving into the turn of the year, and then, who knows from that point. So, but as I say, I have seen quite a lot of Derby wins, so maybe I'm a bit blasé about it. But if you offered me that, then I'd snap your hand off for 9 points. And if I'm being greedy, I don't want to go there and get whacked 4 or 5, because I don't think that would be pleasurable for anybody connected with Norwich. But if it was a narrow defeat and they've given a good account, then bookended by 9 points from 12, yeah, I'd take that all day, Connor.
Yeah, and Adam, in the spirit of a very famous TV show coming back, if I offered you 9 points from 3 wins, or a Derby Day defeat, or a Derby Day win, and I don't know, fewer points, deal or no deal to that?
I'd have to go with Sam, to be honest. I think just for kind of the fact that the Ipswich fans generally, from what I've gauged off social media and maybe other media outlets following their club, probably feel it's their time and they're going to get the win. So I think it would just be typical Norwich to rock up there and go and get a result and just kind of deflate that bubble. For me, that humour that would bring is worth far more than potentially 3 wins that might mean Norwich finish 12th rather than 13th. So I think for that reason, just to continue that run as well, because I think that'll take them through then till obviously the return game in April. It'll be nearly 15 years then. 15, yeah. So I think for that just for those purposes, and I know a couple of people that support the other side of East Anglia, so just I suppose for that reason as well, it just gives a little bit of bragging rights that even in this pretty difficult season could be a bit of a bright moment.
Yeah, well, you referenced Ipswich players already speaking about the derby. Caden Jackson has done just that. He's very keen for some revenge. I think he's one of few Ipswich players that were involved in that 3-0 defeat, which I think he said that they could have won on a different day, which is a different debate in itself. But I mean, since we're talking about the derby now, I didn't really want us to have this conversation yet, but we're here. And you've said it. It would be very funny now if Norwich are able to get anything from that game, given what they are achieving, and it has been an incredible season from their perspective. And given their home record and how freely they score at home, and given how poorly Norwich City have been this season, if that record is still intact after that game, it would I don't know, would that be more funny than the Tim Closer header? I think,
No.
You don't think? You think?
Well, funny. Was that funny?
That was funny.
That was just
funny.
Well, it was funny, but it was a magical moment.
But it was also funny.
You mean funny from a ha Ipswich dimension?
Yeah.
No, I think in what we've mapped out here, to go to Portman Road and walk away with either a point or 3 would top that, definitely, because the trajectories of the two clubs. You look at the points differential right here, right now. It shouldn't even be an argument. Ipswich should roll over Norwich on that night, but derbies, to coin the cliche, the form goes out the window, doesn't it? And if it's just a arm wrestle, then I'd fancy Norwich's chances in that type of game. Where I'd fear is if Ipswich continue in the same attacking vein that they have done and sweeping teams aside at Portman Road, which cuts to Adam's point that if they get too caught up in the emotion of it and the hype of it, that might just knock them off kilter a little bit. So it's a really interesting dynamic in play going into that game. Yeah,
there is a game, I think, that Brian Hamilton was in charge of Norwich, and for anyone who is that clued up with Brian Hamilton's reign of Norwich, it wasn't particularly great, but and Norwich under his reign weren't particularly great, but he went to Portman Road in, I guess, kind of similar, so I don't think they were doing quite as well, but in similar circumstances and managed to get Norwich a win, so it's not completely unheard of, but yeah, that's a game that is looming large on the horizon, but there's 2 ahead of that, and I guess, Sam, all of this leads into the need that, irrespective of how you feel at the moment, whether you're basking in the glory of 9 points from a possible 12, or whether, I think, which is probably where we are in terms of, it's great, but we need to see a bit more performance levels. You've got 2 games now at home to really do that. That needs to be the target for Norwich City.
Yeah, I think, to be fair to yesterday's performance, I may well be in the very slim minority, but I thought it was probably quite a significant improvement on some of the performances we've seen in recent weeks. When you look at how dire they were against Watford, QPR was one of the least entertaining games of football I've ever seen in my life. I didn't think Norwich were good. I didn't think they looked like a playoff reaching team, but they probably looked like an upper mid-table team, which is actually above where they are at the moment. So I think in that sense you could say they were tracking in the right direction. I think there were some good performances from individuals who probably needed it. Looking at Ono Hernandez and Marcelino Nunez, I think that's probably Nunez' most consistent performance for more than a year. Even looking back at, I think, that double against Birmingham, those were pretty much the only 2 moments he produced in that game. So that was probably his most assured and busy and reliable performance for a long while. And I did think actually there were a few positives, without wishing to sort of speak up too much, a game that felt very Championship mid-table. So I felt like if they can carry that on, they might be heading in the right direction, but it's just whether there was actually any real rhyme or reason to the way that game panned out, which you'd suggest, based on the evidence of this season, there probably wasn't. In pre-season, we heard they were going to be solid and they were going to try and nick goals almost in the way that they did against QPR and a little bit against Bristol as well. Then they started the season with this free-flowing, free-scoring team that was actually terrible defensively but was managing to get the results. And then they went into this barren period where Wagner didn't seem to have any ideas other than what started the season, and Josh Sargent's injury seemed to derail that. So that would suggest to me that it's going to be hard for them to replicate what they've been doing in these home games against Preston and Sheffield Wednesday, because I'm not sure they've come entirely from a route of planning and conscious decision making. I think they've come more from maybe not luck, but more individual performances and moments. You spoke about that XG, obviously, that seems to be, and has been for years now, a very consistent indicator of where teams are tracking. So the signs of them being able to carry this on probably aren't good, but the teams that they're playing suggest they should be able to do it. Obviously, Preston start the season very well, but there's always that Championship team that seems to surprise everyone at the start. I suppose Norwich you could throw into that bracket this season as well, and then tails off, and Preston have been that. Sheffield Wednesday, as you said, have been really poor. So there is an opportunity to go and improve the performances, but it's just about whether they've actually got it in them. We can speak about it theoretically the whole time, but if they don't have the players, and you look at even the players who were impressing at the start of the season, I think it's definitely fair to say that John Rowe, although he still looks like a good Championship player, isn't tearing it up as he was a couple of months ago. Gabriel Sara looks really like the only promotion-worthy player in that team. So they probably could raise performance levels on a short-term basis, but I'm not sure they've really shown that they've got the tactical nous to do that. So without being too negative, I think we probably will see more of the same. If Norwich are able to get results out of it, it'll be more fairly stodgy, unentertaining performances. I think that might even be the best way for them to go at the moment, because I don't think they have the players to do it in a more entertaining or exciting way. That's probably how Wagner's looking at it, and you can look at the evidence of the start of the season, but that's increasingly looking just like a pretty small sample size in which they were in very good form. So that's quite a massively negative response to that question, but I think probably we'd all be in agreement that the chances aren't high that they go and somehow produce these really tactically strong, really impressive, really exciting performances at Carrow Road. And you look at the way that they've played at home recently, especially, and that is probably a worry for me. And at the same time as we're looking at things, especially the Preston game, as they're in poor form, Preston will be looking at it actually thinking Norwich is an opportunity for them to end their run of negative results and to try and get back on track. So, there are two sides to it. But yeah, I feel like that's quite maybe a more negative response than maybe it justified. But it will be quite a difficult task to turn the performances that they've been putting out in the last few weeks into better ones and more consistent ones. And maybe actually they just need to ride the wave of momentum into that derby. That for me might be their best chance of going to Portman Road and trying to get something, to be honest.
And on that cheery note, let's move into part two. If anyone was producing a bingo card for yesterday's game, I'm not sure a Norwich City win would have been that far on it, but also a comparison from this man to my left between David Wagner and Jose Mourinho, which is good. That was quite a celebration from Norwich City's head coach, wasn't it?
A special one, yeah. No.
Let's not go there.
No, it was mad. It was mad. obviously following Idah, ball slots in, turns around, bit of typing, look up, and David Wagner, what's he doing on the pitch? So, brilliant reaction, just purely on a human level. Said it right at the start of the podcast.
Missing the knee slide, though.
Yeah, although then some churlish hack in the press room afterwards. Oh, well, there was a big difference because Jose ran basically down the touchline and didn't celebrate with anyone other than himself. And it's all right, mate. Yeah, okay. If you want to go that route. I mean, essentially it was a manager who, to quote David Wagner, just lost his mind for a moment in the emotion of it and euphoria of it, and did something. Certainly, we've not seen him do that in these Norwich guys. I doubt very much. I mean, maybe there was,
There was one at Huddersfield where they beat Leeds, I think, and I remember him sprinting down the touchline. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not a unique, but very rare. And I mean, Paul Chesterton, our photographer, has some absolutely brilliant images of those moments of Wagner jumping on Idah, of players jumping on Wagner and Idah, the aftermath, Borja Science, Shane Duffy, just outpouring of emotion towards the away end. Brilliant that it was at that end as well, there's 1,100 or so pre-dawn departures in many cases. Just, let's be honest, whether you do what we do for a living or you're a supporter or you're a football coach or a football player and you're getting well remunerated, but put all that to the side, that's what football's about. It's that emotional, lost in the moment feeling of pure joy. That's what it's all about. And that's why, I guess, because those moments exist and we've all experienced those moments around Norwich in years past, that when it goes the other way and consistently goes the other way, that's why there's such frustration, because football at its purest, which was that moment there when Adam Idah hit the ball, hit the back of the net, that's what it's all about. And purely on a human level, for David Wagner, as he said afterwards in the presser, for 6 weeks he's had to answer questions about his future, and he has done, and consistently said, look, it's not up to me, it's in the hands of others. I'll just continue to do what I can do, work as hard as I can with my coaches, and what will be will be. So on a purely human level, for him to be able to experience that contrasting emotions, great to see. But you'd like to hope there's a few more down the track with him in charge still, because it's a lot more enjoyable for whether it's what we do or whether it's your fans when they're doing well and things are going well, and everybody likes that. The excitement's human nature. You want optimism, you want excitement, you want something to enjoy. You don't want misery, frustration, and I mean, football's supposed to be a release, isn't it? Not more drudgery in your life. There's plenty of that anyway in people's lives. So that for me, in one microcosm of David Wagner launching himself Usain Bolt-like down the touchline and then encroaching on the pitch. I mean, we have said just before we started recording, hopefully there isn't any repercussions, because that would be, quite official in that sense. If referees or assessors or fourth officials have documented that encroachment and there's some sort of fine coming down the track, but then we don't need to get into that debate about football's gone and with VAR and what have you. But parking whatever repercussions there might be, just that release. I think probably in that one act, you saw a man who'd been under the most intense pressure, fighting for his future as Norwich manager, and just that release in that moment, go and celebrate with his players, and wring every last moment of euphoria out of that. And then the scenes at the final whistle as well with the away supporters who, tremendous, really. You cannot underestimate off the back of, and I'm sure we'll get into it in short order, the annual meeting and that sort of standoff. For them to experience that, never more deserved, really, was it?
And can I just say, if anyone does feel there should be repercussions for David Wagner, honestly, grow up. What a ridiculous thing that would be. To fine him for that would be ludicrous. If we get to that stage, then the game's gone, to use that cliche. Just finally on the game, Adam, before we come into the AGM shenanigans, Angus Gunn, we kind of touched upon it a little bit. 2 really big saves in the first half. Really good to see him back first and foremost, but also probably underlines just how important he is to this Norwich City cause, and I guess probably why he's their number one. Well, 28, but number one.
Yeah, I think I saw a few people on social media saying it. Sort of those saves in the first half kind of kept Norwich in the game, where maybe at Watford George Long, a couple of sort of shaky moments that have cost them potentially getting some sort of form of result in a game they didn't really deserve anything from. But yeah, for him as well, just to be back in between the sticks, after kind of what would have been probably a difficult period. He missed the international break for Scotland, and sort of, I suppose, having to watch Norwich's results from afar, and the performances, I'm sure he'd have wanted to have got back in between the sticks. And yeah, I think for him as well, it's unfortunate probably that he didn't get a clean sheet. Sort of the way he performed is probably one of the only players that could probably come off the pitch and say they performed to a really high level yesterday, despite the result, of course. So great to see him back, and I think particularly for like those games against like Ipswich, he's going to absolutely relish that. He's obviously, of course, a Norwich boy, a Norwich fan. I remember the game there a few years back when the Madison one, where he sort of celebrated in front of the sort of noisy end at Ipswich, if you want to term it that. I'm not sure it was that noisy before recent years, but to sort of see something like that again would be great. So for him to be back, it is big, because you could sort of see I suppose the criticism for George Long, I think it was justified at different points, sort of some of the mistakes he's made in recent weeks. So sort of great to be back and feeling quite confident with who you've got between the goal.
Absolutely. Let's talk AGM then. Paddy, I'm going to come to you because you weren't there. I know you were watching it remotely, and you've subsequently caught up with the interviews and whatnot afterwards. What do you make of it? That feels like the question to ask. It's obviously inflamed quite a lot of debate. It probably would have, and again, I'm sure that perhaps Delia and Michael in particular were particularly glad when that Adam Idah goal went in, because if not, I think there would have been perhaps a lot more conversation and a lot more angst around at this moment in time as ever. And again, I keep coming back to Dean Smith when he used to say, winning is the best sticking plaster you can have to an extent. What did you make of everything that was said, both from shareholders, from those at the top table as well? What was said subsequently in those media interviews?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of things. I think if you were a Norwich fan, you would have liked what you'd heard. I thought Napa spoke very well. I thought Mark Atanasio spoke very well in the formal meeting and subsequently in the round of interviews. But I also felt it very much screamed, this isn't a temporary fix. This is multiple transfer windows. If we reference the quote about from Ben about lowering the age profile of the squad, you don't do that in one window. That's multiple seasons worth of work. Let's be honest. The sort of the Atanasio line about this data, in-house data that they want to build out from, and that'll inform all their decision making, recruitment, playing, maybe even sports science and the medical departments. All of that doesn't happen overnight. So I think there was a realism there that this is quite a prolonged turnaround time, but unfortunately all of that I think was overshadowed hugely by the comments, principally from Delia, regarding whatever percentage you want to put on it, but nevertheless a constituency of Norwich fans who they feel to use her phrase, whingers. Terrible optics in a room of shareholders. I said this on our Insta Live Sunday morning before we left for Bristol. Delivering that message to a group of people who are, in probably majority of cases, season ticket holders, but also shareholders, couldn't get more committed or loyal part of the Norwich fan base, and for them to sit there in a room and hear about how some of their fellow fans are viewed at the top table as whingers, I just thought...
Unfortunately, on top of everything else that they've been called in the last 18 months as well.
And it's worth pointing out that response from Delia, impassioned response, was in response to a question from the floor about just give us some hope from a fan/shareholder who said, just, you're a Norwich fan, we want the team to do what you want the team to do, which is perform and give us hope and give us optimism and give us something to believe in, because there's been none of that over the last 2 years on the pitch and off the pitch. And I didn't think that was a question that deserved that response, frankly. But she was obviously frustrated. She wanted to get that message across. It's a message I've heard internally previously, that they do feel there is this percentage who aren't helpful, who are detrimental. I mean, it was more broadly mapped out then in other areas about the atmosphere at Carrow Road, and that the players maybe being inhibited to play in that atmosphere, and none of that really is messaging that fans want to hear. And for me, it's symptomatic of a club that culturally has probably lost its way a little bit, if that's really the view at the top table, and a club who are talking down to supporters and at supporters rather than, bringing them on the journey, which, to give him his due, Mark Atanasio, I think, did reference. I mean, he said, for him, hearing that frustration in the room from supporters/shareholders is actually what he wanted, because that shows they do care and that you can bring them with you on this journey as long as you communicate clearly, consistently, and try and map out what they're trying to do, and that where it is now to where they want it to go to is quite a journey. So shame really that we've been talking subsequently about those comments, really, because clearly that isn't bringing people together. That's divisive, and that's her opinion. That's fine. She's had to bear the brunt of it, I'm sure, down the years, and as Stuart Webber did as well, and people who are in those positions. So I don't deny her the right to say it, but I don't think in that environment at this time, given what they're not doing on the pitch, given the questions around David Wagner, given the patchy recruitment, which Ben Napper himself has more or less alluded to, the fact that the age profile of that squad is clearly wrong and something that he's going to address as a matter of urgency, and then you get into the performance or non-performance on the pitch, failure in the Premier League, failure in the Championship, failure this season so far in the Championship. All of those strands, I don't think, are reflective of a whinging fan base. So, as I say, hopefully, the results Sunday and some positive results in the shorter term will move us past that. But I don't think it was a helpful intervention, if I'm honest.
Yeah, there are points, I think, when you can, Daniel Farke used to do it quite well, Sam, when Norwich, and I remember him doing it during certainly the first title season, at points during the Premier League one as well, where you can say things and want more noise and want supporters to deliver maybe a slightly different message in a slightly different way. But you have to have, well, one, you have to have enough kind of substance on the pitch to suggest that's worthy of that, and also you probably need to have enough credit in the bank to be able to do that. And as Paddy alludes to, given the way the club has transpired over the last 2 years and what they've not done on the pitch, perhaps more than what they have done, it creates, again, optics. It's the optics of it, and we heard a little bit of it at Ashton Gate. It wasn't the majority of the fan. I'm not getting into percentages, but it wasn't the majority of that away end that we're seeing. I'm not quite sure whether we've worked out this scene. It's all our fault or it's not our fault. It was one of those. It's that optics, isn't it, of this kind of blaming of fans again that causes a real frustration for Norwich fans, because they had this with Stuart Webber a few times, who would prod them and poke them and call them divorcees and all of those kind of elements. It's just not helpful. And I've said it before, football clubs, and we've spoken about unifying and togetherness. If you're going to succeed and be successful and create and perhaps even perform more than the qualities that you have in the squad and on the pitch, 18-19, you could go back to obviously the Paul Lambert era, Nigel Worthington's team. Those really successful teams in Norwich City history have been everyone united, pulling in one direction. This just feels like another kind of us and them situation.
Yeah, and I think probably the levels of consideration as to what was said makes a big difference. You obviously spoke about Daniel Farke there and the way that he used to message it when he wanted more noise and maybe more support, and he wanted everyone to pull together. He was somebody who spoke very emotionally, and even when he obviously came back earlier this year, it was quite heartfelt, but he was also somebody I felt that really knew what he was saying and knew what message he wanted to convey, whereas you got the sense from the interview with Delia and Michael and Mark Atanasio after the AGM, it was actually it felt more like a chance for Delia to vent her frustrations than to put a message across that would get Norwich any closer to achieving their aims. She speaks about a minority of fans and 20% whingers and whatever. So then when you've got the opportunity to speak to these fans and to try and get them on side, actually do that. Don't just vent and treat them like opposition. And I'd also question those percentages in terms of what she categorises as whingers. Surely she doesn't believe that 80% of Norwich fans think that things are going well at the moment. You'd be concerned if it wasn't actually more than 80% that felt things were going pretty poorly, because otherwise the standards at that football club have slipped considerably. And yeah, I don't really understand this culture of seemingly falling back on it's fans' fault when things go poorly, because if you've ever spoken to players and coaches, really the message that they often give actually is, maybe fans make a little bit of difference, but once you're on the pitch, you're focused on the way that you're playing, and actually it doesn't make huge amounts of difference. And there have been times, yes, when you felt like the players' performance was affected by the atmosphere at Carrow Road and the way that fans felt. But the only time I really significantly felt that maybe impacted the result at all was that Blackburn game under Dean Smith when they lost 2-0, and that was the most toxic atmosphere there's been at Carrow Road for a really, really long time. So it's not like week in, week out these fans have been impacting the play in a negative way. In fact, they've actually been fantastic, and I think you've spoken about it a number of times, how from the start of the season they've been willing to give the team a chance against Hull. They went 1-0 down against a team that wasn't really expected to challenge for promotion, on the back of the worst season in recent history, really, for Norwich. And they were still back in the team, and their response was still to chant louder and try and get the team back in the game. So they have given this team plenty of chances, and they've given Wagner plenty of goodwill. It's not like as soon as that winning run ended at Rotherham, they were willing to turn. I remember actually speaking to fans after that game, and there was no feeling whatsoever that things were going to turn the way that they did. It was everyone I spoke to, it was a blip, and Norwich have been good enough this season and they can challenge for playoffs. There was nobody there willing to turn. They only turned when results fully turned and when the team became a mid-table team, and the mid-table team that they are now. So I feel for those fans in a big way. Paddy mentioned culture, and I think it's scarily indicative of the way that they're speaking about things behind the scenes. If that's what Delia is willing to say on camera, how do they view the fans when they're speaking about things at Colney? And where is the willingness to take responsibility for what's going wrong? There seems to be a lot of chat about hard work and adoration for Stuart Webber for how many hours he put in and how much he cared, but where is the willingness to take responsibility for footballing decisions and to look at things and say the players haven't been playing well enough, the coach hasn't been coaching them well enough, the right players haven't been recruited above that, everyone around that? Is there any willingness to take responsibility for those decisions, or behind the scenes are they just talking about the fans and how much the negativity is impacting them? Because even if it was the levels of negativity that they seem to suggest there is, which I wouldn't say there has been in a toxic way, that shouldn't be affecting your footballing decisions, and that shouldn't be affecting people to that degree. I spoke to someone actually pre-match at Bristol who made the good point that everyone deals with negativity in their daily lives. It's something you have to address, and plenty of people will come across problems in their working lives. They don't just blame the sort of external factors and observers and what's going wrong and fans for that. I'm not saying everybody has fans in their job, but there are always external factors and things that you could blame. It's not a good way to look at life to blame those things wherever possible. And I think people need to take responsibility inside that club for where things have gone wrong and set about dealing with them in the right way, rather than just acting like it's not their fault.
Yeah, I think there's often two ways to approach this. Maybe there's more, but to me there feels like two. You either take that negativity, which has been. I don't think anyone's denying that it's been there, But you can look at that and then you can internalise it, and you can almost hold a mirror up to yourself and say, okay, how do we change this? How do we make sure that those people who are negative, why are they negative? Are we listening to them? Are we responding to them in a way that is conducive to success, and making sure that we're channeling that energy to keep us going? Or do you just kind of palm it off and go, well, they always feel like that irrespective, so we just plod along? I just don't think you can do that, and then it creates, when you start labelling them as boo boys and whingers, I mean, it's just it exposes the chasm that there is between those two entities at the moment, when fans are thinking one thing and people inside are thinking the other, and it just creates and again she touched upon this kind of unprompted, really. It makes you look and feel out of touch, even though we know they're not, because they do speak to Norwich fans. They are in the Lion and Castle every game, and look, who knows what those Norwich fans are telling them, and who knows what people inside are telling them. But there is definitely a bunch of supporters, and we heard it in the AGM as well, who aren't happy. The biggest applause of the night came from two very good interventions, actually, from Norwich supporters. And then, Adam, there were these very odd comparisons or mentions of Portsmouth, which, I mean, I've had a look, so I've just had a look there. Norwich haven't played Portsmouth in a league game since 2011. It was that Simeon Jackson header that got them promotion to the Premier League. I'm just looking through the list now. So Norwich have never beaten them by 6 goals. I think the biggest defeat that Norwich have inflicted on them, looking at it, looks to be, I can see there was a 3-0 in 1975. They won their 4-1 in 1970. There's definitely no 6-0 or anything. So I don't know. Maybe they go and watch Portsmouth. But when those words are uttered, it's less about Portsmouth. I think that's more probably a tongue-in-cheek point. And again, very, very small minority of Norwich fans trying to get the play out Pompey chant going at Ashton Gate on Sunday. But there was enough that it was audible from where we were. But in my mind, I keep going back to Home Park and Plymouth. Norwich City 4-0 down at half-time. That second half, they were tremendous. They did sing in maybe not support of their team. It almost felt in defiance, really. But they were singing, they were chanting. And that was a point in time where they had absolutely no reason to. They could have been as negative and, of course, not abusive, but certainly as negative as they wished about their team, and they chose not to. So I think this kind of idea that Norwich fans are always negative come what may, I just don't think that's based in reality or fact.
Yeah, I think in some ways the sort of turn in fan mood has only really been in recent weeks. You've kind of seen Carrow Road just feel very apathetic, very quiet. The fans on the road, I think, again, they've got nothing to really to get behind, because the performance has been dire. There's not really been, sort of many goals being scored. They're leaking goals left, right and centre. They have a right to vent frustration, and none of it's ever been abusive towards players or individuals in the football club. It's just been literally pure frustration that their team has no direction and anything of that kind of nature, where you spoke about it at Plymouth. that second half was, I thought the Norwich fans were louder than the Plymouth fans. You'd have almost not known which team was 6-2 down, which is quite quite something for particularly given the expense they'd have made that day, the ridiculously long journey that was, and to still be there supporting their team when they all really could have got back in their cars and made the long journey home to Norwich long before, probably even at half time if you're being realistic. So to then be sort of labelled and sort of, I suppose, sort of this sort of feeling that they're all kind of grouped together as negative and almost impacting their team on the pitch is just not a fair assessment. And I think you look at those individuals who have criticised the fans in recent years, Dean Smith, Stuart Webber, it's never really ended well for any of them. You look at Stuart Webber, he kind of almost ruined what legacy he had at the football club because of kind of the sort of, I suppose, the attack of fans at different points. Dean Smith mentioning, he'd rather play away from home because of the negative nature of Norwich fans at home, and both of them are no longer here, and I don't think either of them are particularly. Well, some fans maybe still have a sort of, I suppose, a warm feeling towards Stuart Webber and what he's done, but certainly not Dean Smith. I think he's struggling to find a Norwich fan that's got many good words to say about him. So it never really ends well. So I think those words were poor, and it doesn't help particularly when you've got the season ticket renewals coming up in the new year, and fans will be sort of debating, in a difficult sort of living crisis we all live in now in terms of financials, whether they can justify spending £500+ to watch what hasn't really been particularly a good product on the pitch for 2, 3, 4 years, for those really that have been in the ground. Really it's been 2018-19 because they obviously had that spell in the title winner season in 2021 where they weren't even present, so they haven't actually seen a good product on the pitch for quite a number of years. And I know if I was personally still a season ticket holder, I think this would have been a season where I'd be debating whether I would want to sort of pay that hard-earned money to sort of go to Carrow Road every week, and if you're not really getting any release or no excitement or anything for the effort you're making, as well for the away fans, the journeys they have to make every single week, if they're not seeing anything, then why should they part with their money? And then to have sort of, I suppose, that sort of further fuel added by the comments that Delia made, it's just not helpful. And this idea that Portsmouth fans are still cheering their team 6-0 down, I really struggle to see that that's the case. I think any team, if they're sort of seeing what the Norwich fans are seeing on the pitch at the moment, are going to be negative. I mean, you could almost see it yesterday with Reading fans, the way they're protesting against their ownership and sort of what they're seeing on the pitch at the moment. We've seen it, Bolton fans in the past, Wigan, I could go on. I know these are clubs that are more financial crisis issues related, but there has been sort of situations where other teams have seen sort of their teams performing poorly on the pitch and turned in the same manner. So I think it's an unfair representation, and why Portsmouth, when Norwich, as you say, haven't played them in the league since 2011. I know they had the FA Cup game at Carrow Road 4 or 5 years ago, but they've not played them for years. So it seems a really bizarre I suppose comparison of fans, but yeah, just not helpful in the current climate and the fan feeling around the club at the moment anyway.
Yeah, and what you said about season tickets, particularly when you read sort of minutes of supporter panels meeting, and they're floating the idea of a 3% increase, and they're speaking about potentially, they're looking at whether or not to change certain age bands within season tickets as well. These are things that optics-wise won't particularly, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel like things that are going to go down particularly well, particularly as you said in the financial, not that we need to go down this route, but the economic sort of climate of the country at the moment, where people are having to make really tough decisions about where they spend their money, and I don't know if it still is the most expensive season ticket in the Championship, but it's certainly up there. So none of this helps. And Paddy, just on the final point on this is that, what we should be sat here talking about is what Mark Atanasio said about self-funding, about data and analytics, about why they chose Ben Napper. There was some really interesting stuff in that conversation, and we're not, and that's a shame. And it felt a real contrast. You had one who, or maybe two people there who felt maybe quite defensive in nature, quite willing to have pokes at supporters, and one maybe who was more measured and more reasoned, and was very honest when it came to Watford, and said that it was all of the club's deficiencies being laid bare, and it spoke about supporters as well, and the important role that they play. It felt a real contrast of kind of messaging that you had from the top people at the football club, who are soon going to be on the same percentage of shares. Ironically, not 20%, but it's the same percentage.
No, I mean, the reality is everything now is geared up to the transfer of power from the old guard. That's not an uncharitable term, but two people who've historically, as I don't think it's over exaggerating to say, they probably did save the club at periods of time and navigated it through some choppy waters, and have brought success on the pitch, and that legacy should be ring fenced. Absolutely no question about it. Huge figures in the modern day history of Norwich City Football Club, but they are the past. Mark Atanasio is the future. That is taking any emotion out of it. That is that's what it looks like when you see that AGM. That's what it looks like when you see the financial interdependence on Atanasio and his Norfolk Holdings vehicle, the group around him. The last set of accounts made that very clear. He is the kingmaker in all of this now. When I talk about him, obviously we know there's other people, family and friends in that group, but he, as he mapped out in that round table, he is the arbiter. He makes the decisions. He makes the calls, the final calls. But we're in this holding pattern because we know it was clearly mapped out in the sort of the allotment share process that there's this lockstep approach with Delia and Michael and Mark Atanasio for the next probably 2.5 years now, backdated from January this year. That feels like a long time now, and it feels like it probably won't run its course, because I think if increasingly looks to be the case, we're in for a few years of Championship football, the financial pressures around sustained membership of the Championship, i.e. no Premier League broadcast revenue to factor in, that's only going to increase the reliance on Atanasio as the knight shining armour to the rescue, because it's very hard to see how this current situation in terms of Delia and Michael kind of driving them forward is going to work in terms of the finances that are not going to be there moving forward if they're in the Championship for any length of time. So that's probably a frustration for some Norwich fans, that they can see a roadmap now to a future which isn't Delia and Michael, and it is a guy who comes with his 18, 19 years worth of ownership of a major sporting entity in the Milwaukee Brewers, who comes from a financial background. He's a very astute businessman. Finances are his thing. All the elements that you feel could drive Norwich forward into a new era, whether you want to attach a self-funded model on it or not, or label on it or not, it's a moot point. But clearly a guy who has access to finance, who can bring in finance, who understands what it means within a sporting context, because he's applied the same formula successfully to the Brewers. By no manner of means one of baseball's biggest hitters in terms of their finances and competing against bigger rivals with bigger finances. All of that is very exciting, but it feels like we're almost on the start line, and until Delia and Michael are willing to pass the baton on, for want of a better phrase, then there's going to be that feeling of holding pattern. And it's an interesting dynamic with Ben Napper now. He's been brought in clearly as a candidate who chimes with the Atanasio worldview of what a sporting model looks like and the importance of data in that. But he's clearly still going to have to sort of work within this boardroom dynamic that is Delia, Michael and the Atanasio. So that doesn't strike me as the best way forward in the short term, but that's where we're at. And I think if this season pans out as it feels like it will do, which will be another season of Championship football to look forward to, or not in the case maybe, but and more so the finances, what that means for the finances moving forward. To me, that I don't see any other alternative other than that accelerating the move to Atanasio taking it on lock stock. Obviously not in terms of pure shareholding mix, but essentially the guy who's driving this forward now with the financial wherewithal and the sporting ownership nous to plot a different course. And if Napper is the individual they think he is, that's why he came through that very rigorous recruitment process. If he proves himself to be that type of person, then I'll go back to my first point about the AGM. For me, that was exciting because it was optimistic. It was something new, as it was in 2017 when Webber first came in and appointed Daniel Farker. That was new, that was innovative, that was ahead of the curve, and the results spoke for themselves after that first season of adjustment on and off the pitch. I think Norwich fans desperately crave a repeat of that, and in Napper and in Atanasio, it feels like the ingredients are there. But because of this lockstep approach, that's the imponderable at the minute. How soon will we turn the dial and it will definitively be a new era and a new direction of travel?
Yeah, and what I would say is the Atanasio camp are definitely aware of, understanding of, and appreciative of the fans' frustrations. Probably maybe even in agreement of some of the fan frustrations. So that is an element to throw in as well. You used the word holding pattern. That seems like a nice place to end the pod, because Norwich are flirting with a bit of optimism, a bit of positivity, but it feels like the next two home games in particular, probably the next three games in the bigger worldview, with one very big game on the horizon, will dictate where the mood and maybe even where the season goes from here. Thank you very much for watching this week's, or listening to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. We'll be at Carrow Road for that game against Preston, and we'll bring you another episode thereafter.